Start today by kind of reiterating this motorcade again and the important part of the motorcade. Again, the first car in the motor card was called the lead car. You do not have to write down these names, but just so you know, the people in the lead car were Jesse Curry, who was the Chief of Police of Dallas, Bill Decker, Dallas County Sheriff. Some law enforcement were in the car that led the motorcade. Okay? Right behind the lead car was the presidential limousine. You have Roy Kellerman on the passenger side, Bill Greer with the steering wheel there, driving. In jump seats behind them, you have Governor Connolly, John Connolly on this side, and his wife Nellie Connolly. And then in the back of the limousine, you have JFK on this side and Jackie Kennedy on this side. And this simply was kind of a back to the limousine before you got to the end. Okay? And that'll come into significance a little bit later. Okay? Now, behind this, well, before I get to that, between the lead car and the presidential limousine were Dallas police officers on motorcycles. Okay? Behind the presidential limousine was a car full of heavily armed Secret Service agents. These are all Secret Service agents. And between the presidential limousine and the Secret Service vehicle were Dallas police officers on motorcycles. One of the more famous agents here that will come into play stood on a platform on the limousine, and his name was Clint Hill. He will come into play big time today. And he's standing on a ledge. They have these bumper ledges on the side of the limousine in which agents could stand on. And they had them on the, it was actually a great big long one on this vehicle, and they could stand on the ledge. And agents were in the car, but Clint Hill and another agent were standing on this side, one here and one here. Just kind of keep that in mind. Now, behind them was another car that contained Vice President Lyndon Johnson, his wife Lady Bird Johnson, and ironically on purpose, Senator Ralph Yarborough. And Kennedy put him in this limousine on purpose to make it appear that everybody was getting along just peachy keen. He had control of Connolly in the presidential limousine. He wanted to make sure those two people were seen together in that limousine. After that, you had, Texas Rangers and police officers and media and other congressmen and senators, and this thing went like forever. Okay? But the ones we're concentrating on are these right here. So you kind of have an idea of what the motorcade looks like at the start. It goes forever. Okay? Now, as we mentioned, where is the presidential limousine right now in our lecture? It hasn't yet. You're close. It's at Love Field ready to depart because the president and his wife, instead of going straight to the limousine, worked the fence, remember? So now everybody's in the limousine, and it's going to follow this 11-mile route from Love Field through downtown Dallas, eventually hooking onto the freeway and heading to the Trade Mart for Kennedy's luncheon speech, right? We all remember that. So at 11:45 a.m., the presidential motorcade departs from Love Field, heading towards downtown Dallas. At 11:45 a.m., the presidential motorcade departs from Love Field toward downtown Dallas. At 11:50 a.m., as they are driving, the president looks to his right and he sees a small group of children holding up a sign that says, "Mr. President, please stop and shake our hands." So as he's driving on this 11-mile motorcade route, he looks to his right and he sees a group of small children who are holding up a sign that says, "Mr. President, please stop and shake our hand. So what does the president do? He stops the entire motorcade to a complete stop and reaches out and shakes the hands of those young kids. Can you imagine those kids, if they're still alive today, their memory of that? Okay? That happens at 11:50. President Kennedy halts the motorcade to greet a small group of children who are waving a sign which read, "Mr. President, please stop and shake our hands." Motorcade continues. Elisa? And who does the president see, Elisa, at 12 noon off to his right? Who does he see? No, think about your faith. Who does he see? What is your faith? So what did he see standing along the right side? Close. No. No. Lower. Catholic sisters or nuns. So as he looks off to his right, he sees a group of Catholic nuns at 12 noon. What does he do, Naya? Stops the motorcade and shakes hands with the sisters. This is a different time. His assassination is going to change Secret Service protection forever. But this is a different time. So at 12 noon, President Kennedy again orders the limousine to stop. This time he wants to stop and shake hands with a group of Catholic nuns that are on the motorcade route. Now, this gets kind of interesting because as the motorcade gets closer and closer to downtown and gets on Main Street, which you'll understand in a minute, the crowds are getting larger and larger and larger from when they started at Love Field. Everybody's gathered downtown. People are crowding into the street. So now everybody's on the sidewalks on both sides, but the crowds are getting so big they're itching up and they're getting 4 or 5 feet into the street on both sides. So, here's the street, here's the street, here's the limousine. Okay? Jackie on this side, JFK on this side. All of a sudden these crowds are really getting into the street here. So what does the Secret Service do to protect the president from the crowds that are itching into the street?
Does it like deploy some of the men inside of him?
Good guess. They do something simpler than that. They simply move the limousine farther left to get the president away from the crowd. But who does that put in a vulnerable position? Jackie Kennedy. Do you know what Clint Hill's job was from the time the Kennedys came into the White House? You know his protection detail was? Mrs. Kennedy. That's why he's standing here. So, what does Clint Hill do when the decision's made to move the limousine over and put Jackie in a more vulnerable position? He gets off of the limousine here and gets on and will ride on this step crouched down because he was standing here, but the president doesn't want to show, right? So he comes back up here and gets on that step and hunches down to keep an eye on the First Lady. And he's going to ride in that position for quite a while, which we'll explain. So, again, as the presidential motorcade reached the downtown area, the crowds on Main Street were getting larger and larger, people crowding into the street. To keep the president away from the crowd, the motorcade drove on the far left side of Main Street, which put Mrs. Kennedy in a very vulnerable position. And because of this, Secret Service agent Clint Hill departed the Secret Service vehicle and climbed onto the back of the presidential limousine to protect Mrs. Kennedy. And now we're going to get to our picture here. As they get to the end of the 11-mile route, and if you look at the map, this is Main Street, right? And Main Street went for like clear over here. And then Love Field was like way over there. So they have been traveling down Main Street for a long period of time in the downtown area. And when they get to the end of Main Street, they come into an area we know in history as Daly Plaza, which is on your map. So this area, look at me kiddos, this area right here is known as Daly Plaza. And as they're driving down Main Street, they're looking right at, when Main Street gets to Houston Street, they're looking right at Daly Plaza. Now, let me just throw something at you. What was the concern about coming to Dallas? Anti-Kennedy forces were going to embarrass him. They are thrilled to death. They have driven almost 11 miles through the most crowded area. When they got in downtown, people were 4 or 5 feet deep into the street, people hanging out of windows, people honestly hanging on street signs and lamps. They had it made. They had gotten through the worst part of any possible danger. They're at the Main Street and Houston turn. And here's the plan. They are going to make a right turn on Houston, a left turn on Main. They're going to go underneath the triple underpass and hook on to the freeway, the Stemmons Freeway, and go to the Trade Mart. Do you understand that they are at the end of it? There isn't very many people in here at all. You can count them on 2 hands maybe that are actually in the plaza. There are some along the route, but they have made it. The danger is over. And when they take the turn onto Houston Street, what do they see in front of them and to the left? The Texas School Book Depository. What is the Texas School Book Depository? It was simply a warehouse that supplied textbooks to the state of Texas. So if Mr. Durr wanted to order 50 new textbooks for AP US History, I would call the Texas School Book Depository. They would box them up and ship them to me. That's what it was. Keep that in mind. So again, projected was a turn onto Houston Street. Then they would make the left turn onto Elm. Once they got through the triple underpass, they would get on the Stemmons Freeway and take the interstate to the Trade Mart. That was the plan. As they make the turn on Houston Street and look up and to their left, what are they going to see? The Texas School Book Depository, which was a business that sold textbooks to schools in Texas. Now, here's a little bit of a trivia for you. Where's Clint Hill when they make the turn on Houston? Next to Jackie. Well, what are they getting ready to do when they make the turn onto Elm? They're going to get on the highway. So Clint Hill's not going to stay crouched down here. He's going to then, as soon as they make the turn on Houston, he gets off and goes back and assumes his position here. And once they get onto the interstate, he will obviously get inside the car at highway speed. So he protects the First Lady until the turn on Houston. Why? Because the crowds are gone. And he just assumes his regular position, knowing that the car was going to be at highway speed in just a few minutes. Here's where it gets kind of interesting. At 12:29 p.m., looking at your map, the presidential limousine is right in the middle of the Dallas County Courthouse. They're right in the middle of that, right there. Heading towards what? They're going to, no, excuse me, they're right here on Houston Street. And they're heading for the turn on Elm. Okay? So they're right in the middle at 12:29. And at that moment, Mrs. John Conley, Nellie Conley, turns to the president and says, quote, "Mr. President, you can't say that Dallas doesn't love you. Mr. President, you can't say that Dallas loves you." I'm going to show you a video where she tells you about when she said that. Why would she say that to him? Why would she turn at that point and say, "Mr. President, you can't say that Dallas doesn't love you"? Leighton, why would she say that?
Because they got through the crowds about anything they accepted.
And everybody loved the guy. I mean, they were crowded in cheering and clapping. This projection that he would be treated poorly, they were kind of thrilled and relieved because there was that possibility. And Mrs. Conley just spontaneously turns to the president and says, "Mr. President, you can't say that Dallas doesn't love you." President nodded back at Mrs. Conley, and the motorcade makes the sharp turn onto Elm Street, in which they had to make a 120-degree turn and slow the limousine down to 11 miles per hour. Now when you go to lunch today, drive out of the parking lot in the back at 11 miles an hour and see how slow that feels to you. Okay? It's not a fast speed. So the point is, he's going to have to gain momentum, the driver, once he gets on Elm. They're not going to be going 50 miles an hour down Elm. They're going to be going pretty slow because the turn shuts them down at 11. Okay? Keep that in mind. All right, kiddos, that takes us to the moment, the assassination of President Kennedy. You know where he's at. He's made the turn on Elm. Just picture in your mind on your map. They just made the turn, the left turn onto Elm.
So why did they take Elm Street, not just going straight down Main?
Because you are awesome for asking that, and I'm going to answer that. I've never had a kid ask me that, and Victor had asked me that last period, and now you're asking me now.
Just look at the map.
Yeah, well, I'm going to tell you why they did it. Because conspiracy theorists go, ooh, they set him up. They took that unnecessary turn onto Elm because he was set up to be assassinated. No, I'm not kidding you. They say that all the time. I'm going to tell you, it's a good point. I'm going to tell you why. And I'm going to show you later. Okay, now, when the presidential limousine made that sharp left turn, it continued down Elm Street toward an area right here, look at me, that we know now as the grassy knoll. It's simply a grassy area between this monument area here and Elm Street. It's known as the grassy knoll now. It wasn't called the grassy knoll then. I will tell you later how it got its name. But it's now known as the grassy knoll. I think it's on your ID sheet. So after the presidential limousine made that sharp left turn onto Elm, it continues down Elm Street towards a grassy incline to the right, now known as the grassy knoll. I'll tell you a little later where it got its name. So, the presidential limousine travels down Elm Street toward the freeway exit, and suddenly at 12:30 p.m., 3 shots ring out in Daley Plaza. At 12:30 p.m., as they're traveling down Elm Street toward the freeway exit, 3 shots rang out in Daley Plaza. These 3 shots that would be fired in Daley Plaza would change the course of American history forever. At 12:30 p.m., 3 shots rang out in Daley Plaza, and these 3 shots will change the course of American history forever. Now, I am telling you the historic vision. Okay? A later investigation by the federal government called the Warren Commission, which we'll talk more about later, stated this is where the 3 shots ended. I'm telling you the historic investigation. I will tell you this before I get into this, because I don't want you to God Victor was being a conspiracy theorist before I ever got through the shots. But anyway, I do believe, without doubt, in all the years I studied this, there were 3 shots. I do believe, without doubt, Lee Harvey Oswald fired those 3 shots. I don't necessarily agree with the order in which the shots were fired and the results, and we'll get into that later. But this is what the Warren Commission states. Okay, and it really, to me, it makes sense, but I don't agree maybe with you. Okay, shot number 1. I want you to look at your map. Came from above and to the right of Kennedy's limousine. Telling you it came from where? Above and to the right. Where'd it come from? Texas School Book Depository. So the first shot came from above and to the right of the president's limousine, now known as the Texas School Book Depository. Now, I'm going to do this the best I can. We've got too many girls in here, but I'll do the best I can to display this, because I can't get on that side of you boys. Okay, the first shot from above hits President Kennedy in the back, tears his windpipe out, and exits out his throat. Now, if you're going to be a conspiracy theorist, I'll beat you to the point. You have to understand that his arm was up on the limousine. His posture would allow that to do that before you think, oh God, that couldn't happen. It actually did. In the back, through his windpipe, out the front of his throat. There's no doubt this happened, because you'll see in the Zapruder film, as soon as that first shot is taken, his arms comes straight up to his throat. You can see him as clear as day. Straight up to his throat. And he turns his head quizzically towards Mrs. Kennedy, who's sitting on his left. Okay? So the first shot was fired from above and to the right of the president's limousine. It entered the president's back, traveling downward through his body, exiting out his throat. It ripped his windpipe and exited out the front of his neck. No question. You can see it clear as a bell in the video. Now, according to the Warren Commission, and I'm not totally against this, but maybe not totally for it. Bear with me here. Governor Connolly is actually sitting more this way because he's on a jump seat. Everybody thinks this couldn't happen because he was right in front of him. He really wasn't right in front of him. The bullet comes out of Kennedy's neck, hits Connolly in the back, right below the right armpit. So the bullet comes through Kennedy's neck, enters Connolly's back at the rear of the right armpit, in this area here. The bullet continues through Connolly's body, shattering his 5th rib and exiting out the right side of his chest. I'm going to have you put your hand here. That's as far as we'll go. Anyway, okay. Now, kind of look at Navy a little bit. Good thing she's left-handed. When that bullet comes out of Connolly's chest, it hits his right wrist, shattering the radius bone. And then takes a kind of a weird left and lodges in his left thigh, in which the bullets later recovered.